Hello and welcome to the Quiet Riot, where we discuss film, television, and media. I'm Ainsley, and in today's video we are going to be discussing screwball comedy My Man Godfrey, released in 1936 and starring William Powell and Carole Lombard. Now, prior to the filming of this movie, William Powell and Carole Lombard had been married, but they had been divorced 3 years prior. William Powell actually said that he would not make this movie if Carole Lombard didn't take the role of Irene Bullock. The chemistry is definitely there between these characters, and I love that though they had been divorced prior, you really couldn't think that there was any type of antagonistic behavior between them, and apparently there wasn't. They did remain pretty good friends, and William Powell was actually quite devastated by her death when she died during World War II when her plane went down while selling war bonds. My Man Godfrey was directed by Gregory LaCava from a script by Maury Reiskind with uncredited contributions by the director. The film was based on 1101 Park Avenue, a short novel by Eric S. Hatch. The film follows socialite Irene Bullock, who asks the unhoused Godfrey to be her forgotten man for a scavenger hunt after he refused her older sister and rival. He agrees due to her kindness and his own curiosity. After being awarded, Irene feels bad for what she got him into and offers him a job as the family's butler.
There is certainly more than meets the eye. There is certainly more than meets. There is certainly more than meets. There is certainly more to Godfrey than meets the eye. He is certainly holding.
There is more to Godfrey than meets the eye, and he is certainly holding something back, though we don't find that out until about halfway through the movie. I love that while this movie is a riot, it does deal with some very serious subject matter, particularly the housing crisis, and that's something that we today can relate to. There's a lot of financial strife and food insecurity and just insecurity in general, financially, and there is this very big gap between the wealthy classes and the working and poor classes. Godfrey and his houseless neighbors are treated like commodities and tourist attractions. These specific scavenger hunts that rich people have are something that apparently still happen today, and whether or not they do actually go out and try to find a forgotten man, that I don't know, but apparently this was something that they actually used to do at this time, and I like how this movie actually takes into critiquing the treating unhoused people like commodities and tourist attractions. And you see this with Cordelia, the sister, and her complete lack of awareness, and that is at opposites of her sister Irene, though she is a bit of, though she's definitely a bit spoiled, she is a socialite. She does have a lot more awareness than her sister and mother do, and she's more on par with her father, who himself is going through a hard time, but is not really letting his family in on that reality. I personally am a fan of screwball comedy, but I know if it's not something you're used to, it may seem a little bit too off the wall and difficult to grasp why it would be the way that it is, because it may seem like it's overacting, it's quite theatrical, and so there's certain parts that may be difficult, and because of the overstimulation that occurs within the comedy of anything that's screwball-esque or slapstick, which was very popular at the time. And I like it, but if it's not something you've seen before, it may seem a bit weird, so just be wary of that before going into it. My Man Godfrey can be found right here online. I will leave it in the description box below so you can watch it. There are several versions out there. Some of them are going to be of very bad quality due to the fact that the copyright for this film had actually ran out, so just be wary before watching one. After taking the role of Godfrey, William Powell recommended his ex-wife and friend Carole Lombard for the role of Irene Bullock, and as I had said before, he actually refused to take the role unless Carole Lombard took the role as well. There is a lot of really great chemistry between them in this film, and I love how Carole Lombard as Irene really seems like this kind of lovesick girl. She takes that role very seriously, and she plays it very well, and even though it is screwball, so it's going to be a lot more theatrical, we let her in.
God, stop it.
It's okay. Hello, baby. You can go.
Okay.
Even though Carole Lombard's performance is quite theatrical as it is screwball, she does bring this incredible heart to the character, as she does in all of her roles. This was Universal's first film after new management had taken over the studio. With few stars under the contract, the studio had to borrow stars from other studios, which was quite a popular practice at the time, but as you as a studio would borrow, you would also have to give them another star for a movie, and in this case, they had to get both William Powell from MGM and Carole Lombard from Paramount. The film was developed under Carl Laemmle Jr., the predecessor of Charles Rogers. Production for the film went from April 15th to May 27th, with retakes in early June of 36 before its release. Director LaCava was a former animator who worked in freelance for the majority of his film career, and he was known to be an eccentric. The film was a runaway hit, premiering on September 6th in 1936, with a US release on September 17th. One of the most acclaimed of the year, the film was remade in 1957 with June Allison and David Niven. My Man Godfrey introduces us to houseless Godfrey as he shares his space with houseless neighbors in the dump. He then comes into contact with Cordelia, who he turns down when she asks him to be his forgotten or her forgotten man for this scavenger hunt that wealthy people throw because they have all the money to do so. She ends up falling into the dirt as he refuses and storms off in a huff, but her sister Irene Bullock takes a liking to Godfrey and he does her. They begin a conversation, and then she asks him to be a forgotten man, and due to her kindness and his own curiosities, he ends up agreeing and goes to the event with her, and it turns out that she was the first to have a forgotten man. This means that she is awarded the trophy for the night, winning the scavenger hunt. After this, they have to ask Godfrey a few questions, he ends up answering them, and then she is officially awarded. Godfrey makes this speech that basically scandalizes the whole party, and Irene herself takes this to heart and feels bad for her involvement in it, and she ends up apologizing to him and then decides to hire him as the family's butler because apparently they can't keep one. And you'll soon find out why. Cordelia shows up with her own forgotten man, and someone eventually gives him $5 because that's what she promised. And the mother is definitely an eccentric herself, and that seems to be the family, the Bullock family, particularly the women of the family. Not only are they the dad, the mother, and the children, there is also a man that follows the mother around, and I think he's the one that actually ends up giving her $5, or the houseless man $5. But, of course, the mother and sister are not particularly fond of the fact that she hired him on as butler, but he shows up the next day, clean shaven. He looks real clean and nice, and it's really cute because Irene is quite upset when she sees him and doesn't realize that that's who he is. But the relationship from the top of it is one of equals, I would say, which is not something that you would particularly find between a houseless person and someone who's born into immense wealth and doesn't know anything about what it is to live in that situation. Class struggle, a class divide, and love are at the forefront of this story as Lombard's Irene quickly falls for Godfrey. I do believe that her love for him is genuine, but it also comes from a place of this thirst for adventure and having something her older sister doesn't have or will never want. It's a comfort to her. Irene actually wants Godfrey to be her protege in the same way that her mother has Carlos, the man that I had previously mentioned. Apparently in the script, the writers had Carlos referred to as a gigolo, but in another... I need to get her something on there that says filming in progress.
I know, it's like, you need to get a red light out here.
Yes. Apparently, in the script, the writers had Carlos referred to as a gigolo, and this was much to the dismay of Joseph Bren, who demanded that they change this. But in another part that I read, it turns out, or the other possibility, is that when Joseph Bren read the script, he believed that protege was supposed to be some kind of innuendo for gigolo, and I don't think that's the case. He's meant to be a moocher who takes advantage of the mother's sensibilities, and he kind of just follows her around like a puppy. I'm not actually sure what his character is supposed to mean. I feel like it's easy to kind of figure out what the Bullock family means and then who Godfrey is, as well as the other houseless individuals that we come in contact in the movie. But Carlos himself, I'm not particularly sure. While these moments are meant to be funny, and they are, they also provide context to the lack of understanding that a wealthy socialite may have for other human beings not of the same status as them. While everyone in the house grows fond of Godfrey, Cordelia has suspicions, going as far as attempting to set Godfrey up by placing her own pearls beneath his mattress. The continuity in the script and the film stands out. A lesser filmmaker may have moments like this for story progression without fully answering the question of what did he do with them or what happened to that whole debacle. I've seen a lot of films that have moments like this and then it's suddenly just dropped, but it all comes back later, and it's all part of the growth that Cordelia has and where she comes to both as a person and in her relationship with Godfrey. And it's crazy because the film itself isn't really that long, and yet it manages to go through this really great story arc and then have these specifics for the whole family and the characters around them and what they're going through, what they've done, and how they change as it goes on. At a certain point in the movie, we find out that Godfrey does come from a well-off family, and he has experienced life at the other end of the line. He's had wealth, and he's lost it. And that is something that he connects on with the family, as the father has lost money as well, but has not been honest about it with his family. And this is something that Godfrey knows. And when he ends up connecting again with someone he knew while at school in Yale, I believe it was, he ends up deciding to find a way to make a change for his own life while also helping others, and in turn helps the Bullock family for being helpful towards him while also helping the others that he were neighbors with while he was experiencing his own life as a houseless person. And this can be a great message to anybody, to give back to those that have given to you when they need it, and to give back to those that can't give back to you or may never be able to give back to you. there's this message that goes on in our world and that has for so long and continues to, that you can't give to people that can't give back to you, or to expect something in return. And especially, you know, I live in America, so you have a place where our education system is not free, and they expect you to have a secondary education. They expect you to go to college, and yet so many people can't afford it. They have to take out loans. They have to pay them back. And so watching this movie, I really see that message of, I don't know. I feel like the overall message could just be like, be a good person, you know? Be a good person with your wealth, and your wealth does not make you the better person, and give back to your fellow people.
Hey, Editing Ainsley here. I wanted to pop in and give you a few more little facts that I learned about this film, or at least related to this film. And apparently Maury Reiskind, who is the screenwriter for My Man Godfrey, actually doesn't like his work, or didn't when he was alive, like his work to be interpreted. And that's a bit weird, because I think maybe not everything that you write or you do as an artist, as a creator, it's not meant to, or there's really nothing to interpret. But at the end of the day, if you put art into the world, there is going to be somebody who tries to interpret it. So get over it, right? But I think his main reason for not wanting that is because, see, back in the day, Maury Reiskind was a socialist. He was a member of the Socialist Party of America. And I believe he was that while he was writing this. And you can see he did a lot of comedy. He did a lot of fun stuff, a lot of crazy stuff, in a time where that was allowed, or not really allowed, but people were getting away with stuff in movies. And then he turned into a conservative, into a conservative activist. So my thought is that he doesn't want his work to be interpreted because of that, because he has a very different view of the world, or at least when people would come up to him and ask him questions or talk to him about things, and he just didn't, different worldviews. He didn't want his past work to be interpreted and to be seen by any kind of socialist views. Another thing that I remember reading, everything will be in the description box below, but another thing I remembered reading stated that they believe that this movie is more towards a message of ethical capitalism. And I can certainly see that, especially for the time, and especially for things kind of end up for Godfrey. But I also see some more socialist ideals in there as well. So I'm really wondering, if you watch this and you are a fan of My Man Godfrey, or you end up going and watching My Man Godfrey and come back with your own thoughts, do you see this as being something that's more keen to ethical capitalism and believing in the idea that there is an ethical capitalism, which is something I don't think there is. I don't think you can really have an ethical capitalism. Or do you think this is more about, can be interpreted more as certain like socialist ideas and ideals? Because I'm leaning more towards that. But also different time.
I can definitely see the eccentricities of the director. Apparently LaCava actually had a big problem with studio heads. They did not get along, and I think I would really like to sit down and have I don't know, a good talk with that man. But he's obviously no longer with us. But it's always interesting to see, whether it's today or back then, filmmakers who really put their best foot forward. And I can see where Joseph Bren probably just had it out for LaCava, and generally didn't think that this story bode well for wealthy people like him, and Bren definitely wanted to be even more well known than he was. So I don't know, I'm not a big fan of Bren, Ren was like the big old head honcho when it came to the Hays Code. We will be talking about him more later, but I just think that LaCava definitely got his message across in this. Godfrey has a lot of pride, so he'd much rather be a houseless person trying to figure it all out than go and ask his parents for help. But he does end up meeting a friend and going into a business, kind of like a business deal with him. So he definitely has something to offer and something to give. And when we look at it from the beginning, where you have Irene who takes a chance on him, and he shows up and does a hell of a job as the butler, and he ends up meeting with a friend, and they hash it out, and they create something together, and jobs are provided, and a place that essentially provided a home for him as an unhoused person. He ended up turning it into something bigger and better. This is one of those movies that talking about it and getting deeper into it really brings out these emotional aspects, and have what this movie is at its core is something that's very emotionally and mentally stimulating. And when you watch it, it's a screwball comedy, so it's also a laugh out loud riot. But when you look deeper into the story and what it means, and that's a lot to say for both the screenwriter and the director of this, is that there's so much more to a story than meets the eye. And just because something is a comedy and it seems like a straight out comedy doesn't mean that it doesn't have a message to tell. And I don't know, I feel like this is the type, like this would be a movie that Jordan Peele would actually love. I don't know if he's ever mentioned it anything, but I just think the message that exists within this movie and how it is this critique on capitalism, and it's a critique on the immense wealth that certain people have and the lack that others do, no matter how hard they work and no matter how much they would actually do if they could, and they lived in a country or a world that could help provide for them, and then they could in turn help provide for it. There's this sense of, if you can't give me something in return, there's no way I'm gonna help you, and that's not how we should be as people. A message that shines through is that there is nothing wrong with help. There's nothing wrong with giving it, and there's nothing wrong with receiving it. And that's the simpler way to put it. That is something that Godfrey learns at the end, is that sometimes in order to get better, or to even provide help to others as well, you in turn have to accept help. And that help can get you one step further. The way that the world is built, even then, it could be so essentially hard for somebody who fell on hard times to get out of it. And luckily for Godfrey, he met this like sweetheart of a person, Irene, and fell in with this family, and then by that he was able to meet an old friend, and he may never would have done that before because he had to learn how to ask for help and be honest. And so there was something that was able to happen there. And it's just, when you come to the end, it's kind of at this abrupt ending, because you have Irene being like, oh, we're gonna get married, and you don't really get to see them get married, but there is this sense of Godfrey knowing what it is on all ends. But even though that's something that Irene doesn't have, she's somebody who listens and who knows how to be a helping hand for someone, and who's willing to be that hand. And that's something that she has that Cordelia or her mother does not. And so at the end, for me, the big takeaway at the end, for me, the big takeaway at the end of My Man Godfrey is that it's okay to ask for help. it's okay to help someone out, and that though there is a big class divide between the ultra wealthy and the working class and the houseless population, that does not mean that we can't come to common ground. Just, I don't know, the rich has to be willing to do it. I'm kind of surprised that this was a movie that was able to be made in 1936. The Hays Code was about a year prior. It had been enforced by the time that this movie was made, and it was actually enforced in July of the previous year. And then in 1936 there was this film being made that was really a look at a extreme wealth that exists in the US and the class divide between the ultra wealthy and then the working class and poor population here in the US. And I see the movie as being an absolute critique on America, which is something that some people don't even want to happen today in the year 2022. But I look at this film as being a real... I look at My Man Godfrey as being a timeless movie that people today can look at and see it as a major critique on the government and wealth and population, or the population as a whole, and how it is presented. Because when we watch certain people talk, whether they're politicians or not, they really tend to blame a certain class of people that are not to blame for their own downfall. Now, there may be certain personal individual things, but when we look at something like My Man Godfrey, released in 1936, it is both a critique of the world that it is in and has felt and has gone on to also critique the years and the decades, and in this case, the next century as well. So, as much as I hate to say it, My Man Godfrey is an absolute timeless. It's an absolute timeless film. Now, I hope we get to a point where it is not, but unfortunately right now in the year 2022, if you are like me and you enjoy yourself a nice little comedy with some really important themes in it, I highly do recommend checking this out. You can find it on YouTube. I will link it in the description box below. Any type of research that I may have done to do this, all links will be put in the description box below. I really hope that you decide to give this film a watch and a chance, and I would love to know your thoughts on it. If you have seen it before and you have some thoughts off the cuff, you can just put them in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, and if you want to hear more from me, subscribe and ring that bell to be notified every single time I post. I do have videos in the Hays Code out now, but if you want to see more, I will have some more out, don't worry. I will talk more shit about Joseph Bren, who I absolutely detest, as well as William H. Hays, as well as much more about old Hollywood, films today, television, and all that jazz. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.